Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another Legally Armed America video. Of course, Paul Glasgow here, the one and only Truth Pimp, dealing you a vulgar display of logic and reason on a daily basis. Today is the day before Memorial Day, but that's not why it's special. It's special because, and I'm not really sure what's being celebrated here. I'm not trying to be morbid or anything like that, but today's the 5th anniversary of St. George Floyd and the fentanyl overdose leaving the earth. I know you guys can make all the jokes in the comment section, so I'm going to leave that up to y'all about his 5-year period of time since this happened. But I think it's important that we do talk about some of this because I think the country, and I think that happened leading into November 5th and kind of up to the November 5th election of last year, I think the country is kind of changing. You know, Barack Obama did a really good job of starting to divide this country, and it just went downhill after that. And I think a lot of the country realizes, and I'm talking about all sides, right? I think a lot of the country realized that they had been duped. A lot of people who were falling on the sword of nobility, as if to say, oh yeah, like the Black Lives Matter thing. It came to be one of the biggest scams in American history. They're buying mansions with your money. They're not doing anything to help inner city youth or anything like that. They're putting the money in their own pockets. So a lot of people got taken advantage of with the scam out there. And I think people began to wake up. So before I get into my description of what has come out since then, I think it's a good time frame to wrap up, to recap everything 5 years later. Because a lot of things have come out, autopsy reports, everything. The court case where Chauvin went to prison. He was convicted of second-degree murder. So I think all that we can talk. But I want to point out the uniqueness of this video, the potential uniqueness. I have the chance today to piss off every single person who watches my channel. I'm talking about all sides. I'm talking about if you think George Floyd was murdered by Chauvin, you're going to be mad at me. If you think Chauvin is innocent, you're going to be mad at me. There's a lot going on here. One thing that I pride myself on is fairness. I truly believe in fairness, and I attempt to approach all my videos with as much fairness that I'm capable of. Again, I'm only one person. I'm not perfect. So when I fall short of trying to be fair, sometimes that's me. I'm not perfect, right? But I try. And I think that's important. So you guys, again, by the end of the video, some of you may stop watching it partly through, but remember in the back of your mind the whole time, I am trying to approach this as fairly and even-keeled as I possibly can. So we all kind of know what happened. Law enforcement was called to an area in Minneapolis where Floyd was trying to use a counterfeit $20 bill to buy cigarettes. So he was handcuffed and led to his vehicle by some of Minneapolis's finest. At some point along the way, Floyd decided that he did not want to cooperate. Now, he doesn't look very cooperative in any of these pictures, but he's not slumping to the ground. He is walking until you're not non-cooperative until you become non-cooperative, right? At that point, he went face down on the pavement, and he was in cuffs, of course, and that's when Chauvin put his knee on Floyd's back and neck area. Now, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there that talks about how Chauvin's weight was distributed. And I thought this would be interesting to show you guys. Again, trying to be fair, trying to be impartial here. It shows that the angle that Chauvin was on, if you notice, they're talking about how his toe was off the ground, which means that a little bit more of his body weight would have been on the back and neck area of George Floyd. Now that was one toe, right? The other one, the right foot toe, was touching the ground. So it wasn't 100% of his body weight. That's why they were describing that in that way. But that's, according to them, 91.5 pounds of weight pushing down on the back of George Floyd's back and neck area. Now, there's a lot of conflicting stories of the way people have deciphered and interpreted the autopsy report. So I'm going to show you some key points in that, and I'm going to show you, again, every side of what I think and what's being said here. So this is one of the first points of contention where people are saying that Floyd was not physically injured and that the autopsy report somehow or another exonerates them. I want to explain a little bit about this. Non-threatening injuries identified. So this is mainly showing that he wasn't shot or whatever, but it does point out that there's no real injury, there's no injury at all, to the the neck and the back area. Look down at the letter D where it says no chest wall, soft tissue injuries, rib fractures, other than a single rib fracture from CPR, vertebral column injuries, or visceral injuries. So no injuries other than that rib fracture. I think the documentation of the rib fracture is important right here. We'll talk about it in a little bit when we talk about how George Floyd lost consciousness. Now look at letter A real quick. I want to point something out, and I'm not a doctor, but I can read, so I want to explain some of this to you because I looked up a lot of these words. It says no facial, and I guess that's mucosal, or conjunctival petechia, I guess is how you pronounce that. The reason why that petechia, and again, if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. I'm not here to teach medical school. I'm just here to try to point some things out. Petechia are small red or purple spots that are caused by broken capillaries. You usually see this in cases of asphyxiation or strangulation. Their absence suggests no visible signs of such trauma in these areas. I think that's important. If you would have seen that in those areas, I understand this is a black man. He has dark brown skin. I get all that. But still, there's no visible signs of that same type of trauma that's associated with asphyxiation or strangulation. And as I mentioned a minute ago, there were no contusions or hemorrhages in the front neck muscles or larynx, indicating no blunt force trauma to these specific areas. No trauma to the scalp, skull, or brain. Now, they even looked at his posterior and lateral neck, shoulders, back, flanks, buttocks, and all that, and they released a detailed examination of deeper tissues in these areas, found no hidden injuries, such as internal bleeding or bruising. And one thing that I thought was a little bit interesting, especially with a dope head that's abusing drugs, is that they have anterosclerotic heart disease, multifocal, severe, and hypertensive heart disease. He had a clinical history of hypertension. So the guy was not a picture of health in any kind of way. Again, he is abusing drugs on top of that, but already he wasn't exactly a specimen that we would want to model ourselves after as far as health. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Some of the ones of you out there that are saying Chauvin didn't kill him are like, that's what I'm talking about, Paul. And the other ones who are wanting to say that Floyd was murdered at the hands of Chauvin are calling me racist and all kinds of other names right now. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt me, it doesn't bother me or anything like that. I mean, I get called that all the time, whatever. People get upset and they get into their feelings sometimes and they say stupid stuff. I acknowledge that and I'm aware of that. So it doesn't bother me when people do that. This might piss them off even more, but you gotta hear me out. This is the toxicology report. The first thing that jumps out and the first thing that they actually describe here is the fentanyl level. The fentanyl level in George Floyd's body via a blood test that they took after he died was 11 nanograms per milliliter. That's a measure, that's actually a very small, tiny measurement. So it's extremely precise because it really gets down into a very small level in the blood. So 11 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid, potentially lethal in higher doses. And what are those doses? I list here lethal fentanyl levels. I have my chart here from 0 to 20, and again, this is nanograms per milliliter. According to the CDC and a bunch of other places that I looked at, lethal levels of fentanyl range from 3 nanograms per milliliter to 20. That's a big range, but it shows you as small a range as 3 nanograms per milliliter can kill people. What was St. George Floyd's level of nanograms per milliliter in his blood system after he perished? 11 nanograms per milliliter. Many times that of the small dosage that they already say can kill you. This looks to be about 3 times the dosage probably that can kill you. Maybe 4 times the dosage if you just use plain math. Now, with that being said, and this is where I'm probably going to piss off a lot of the other people out there, probably the remainder of people who might actually be agreeing with me now, is that even though he has 3 to 4 times the lethal dose in his blood system that can kill the average person, I want to point something out. Again, this is based on fairness. How many of you out there, I don't know, let's say drink a lot, beer, whiskey, whatever. When you go a long period of time without drinking any alcohol, what happens when you take that first drink again? It hits you a little bit harder, doesn't it? Why is that? It's because your body builds up that tolerance over time. The effect of that alcohol on your system is a lot less effective over time when you're using that alcohol or drinking that alcohol on a regular basis. Same goes for, I guess, smoking weed. I'm not a weed smoker, so I don't know. But same goes certainly for fentanyl. When you have a habitual, lifelong drug abuser like George Floyd, it's no secret, I'm not slamming the guy at this point. He was a dirtbag. He was a dirtbag before I started talking about him. But he's a lifelong drug addict. When you have been abusing fentanyl for as long as he was, you're going to build that tolerance up. So I'm not saying that the 11 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl didn't kill him. But what I am saying is, if we're being fair here, he probably had a pretty substantial tolerance to that drug that he abused on a regular basis. So while it probably contributed to his death, I think this was a perfect storm. I honestly do, and I'm just giving you my opinion here. I think this was obviously there was trauma as far as anxiety with somebody. You've been arrested, you're in handcuffs, you're face down on the pavement, you got somebody with a knee in your back, you're going back to jail. Not that that's something new to him. The guy was a lifelong criminal. But there's a lot of trauma involved here. I'm not talking about physical trauma. I'm talking about just trauma of the event taking place. So all this is, just coming down on him. So I do think that everything at the same time happening, the fentanyl overdose in his body, the trauma onto his body of the knee, the 90-something pounds of Chauvin on his back, I think all that contributed. But that's just my opinion. Now, one thing that I will say, and this is probably up to this point, I think Chauvin was trained like he was trained. That was part of the training. Again, I'm not saying that you can't see that somebody is not responding at some point and relieve that pressure. Again, I say it all the time. I was just doing my job is not an excuse when you do something wrong. And where I think not just Chauvin, but everybody was wrong was whenever George Floyd actually passed out. When he lost consciousness, his body went limp. It was a good minute or two before anybody began to render aid, and that might be being conservative. It might have been longer than that. That's one area that bothers me. And I know some of you out there are thinking, well, he was a dirtbag, he deserved to die. Look, the world is definitely a better place today without George Floyd. Make no mistake. The world got better when he died. It doesn't mean it's okay to kill somebody because they're a drug head. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about his police record here in a minute. They're really, really whitewashing that in the news. But nevertheless, I think that you don't murder somebody because they're a drug addict. You don't sit here and say that, well, the ends justifies the means. You hear people all the time, I think responsible gun owners, whenever they shoot somebody in self-defense, they call 911 for them. Or those who have been trained in it try to render aid. I think in general, even though somebody has done a wrong thing to you, it doesn't mean that you help them die. I don't think that, well, unless they're breaking in your house and trying to hurt you or your family, I think then there are ways to help them at that point. But you understand my point. I think that they were already trying to subdue this guy. I know that he was resisting arrest. That's why he went down on the ground. That's why the knee went on the back. But he stopped resisting when he was saying, I can't breathe. And then at some point, he stopped breathing and his body went limp. Now, you could tell that. And in the court proceedings, they acknowledge that. Law enforcement does. They acknowledge that we noticed his body went limp. That's probably my only thing at this point that I really feel like I have a problem with, because there were 4 or 5 people standing around at that point and nobody tried to administer aid right away. And that's the only thing I worry about. Again, there's other circumstances. Just like I said in the video yesterday, we're playing Monday morning quarterback here. We don't know if there was some other circumstance out there that the cops were aware of that we didn't. I haven't heard of anything, but maybe there was a danger out there that they presumed or something. I don't know. Did they frisk the guy yet and find if he had anything in his pockets? I'm trying to provide the benefit of the doubt, but that is a question mark that I have. When did somebody decide to render aid, and why was it so much longer after they all recognized that his body had gone limp and he was unconscious? Now, we know they rendered aid because, again, as the autopsy report shows, he did have a rib fracture that they attributed to CPR being administered after he had passed out. Now, to my comments on the world being a better place without George Floyd, I'll stand behind that all day long. All day long. It's got nothing to do with race. Any dirtbag that is bad to people, that's not contributing to society, when they pass on, I'm not going to shed a whole lot of tears for that. You guys know how I feel about bad people when they die. Dianne Feinstein, Senator Ted Kennedy. There's a whole lot of people out there that people made into heroes when they passed away, who were horrible people, morally corrupt, everything, just bad people. And that's not just one political party. Those are the ones that jump to mind, because there's so many on the left. There's plenty on the right. Make no mistake, I'm not sitting here acting like everybody on the right's good. No. Don't put that on me. I'm certainly not saying that. There's plenty of dirtbags there. I'm talking about people in general, regardless of political party. When you are a piece of garbage and you die, we don't have to celebrate you and ignore all the bad things you did and act like you were a saint. You were not. And the world improved when you passed away, which is what happened when Floyd breathed his last breath. Was everything right that happened? No. Is the world better off? Yes. I think we can all agree on that. The man contributed nothing positive to this world. In fact, his police record shows the same. Now, if you look at his police record, it has been whitewashed a little bit, but it starts all the way back in 1997, and it's a bunch of drug arrests. There's some theft involved, and then boom, we get down here. This is where things got really dirty for George Floyd. And in my eyes, he became the person that I would celebrate when they pass away. Look at this. In 2009, Floyd was arrested for a first-degree felony, assault and armed robbery, in which he had participated on August 9, 2007. In that incident, 2 adult women were in Harris County, Texas, that's right around the Houston area, with a toddler when they heard a knock on the front door. When Hernandez looked out the window, she saw a man who was George Floyd dressed in a blue uniform. Floyd said he was with the water department. But soon after Hernandez opened the door, she realized that Floyd was not affiliated with the water department. She attempted to close the door. Floyd pressed a pistol against Hernandez's abdomen, and she was pregnant, by the way. He forced himself into the house. At that moment, a Ford truck pulled up to the house main entrance. 5 other black men exited the vehicle, entered the home along with George Floyd. While Floyd and 4 of these accomplices searched the residence and demanded to know where any money and drugs may have been hidden, the 5th accomplice struck Hernandez on the head and sides with his pistol while she screamed for help. Floyd and his gang ultimately found no cash or drugs in the house, but they stole jewelry and a cell phone before fleeing the scene in their truck. In 2009, Floyd was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he eventually paroled in January 2013. Naturally, let's let him back out on the street. So you can see Floyd was a dirtbag. Again, we're better off today. Now, I think a lot of other people, just like I said at the beginning of the video, are waking up to this. They realize that they got duped. You mean I was burning stuff down for that dude? I mean, really? You were risking going to jail even though nobody did. You were risking going to jail, setting cities on fire over that dude. Nice work. A lot of these communities that put these stupid little murals and statues and stuff like that up are tearing them down. You'll see in a lot of different places where they were celebrating his, quote, life before, they are doing away with that stuff. In fact, in Washington, D.C., if you remember, their mayor decided to paint 4 lanes of a street with Black Lives Matter all across it. Well, guess what? They still have the name of the plaza as Black Lives Matter Plaza, but those yellow letters that you see everybody standing on, now they went in there and they busted all up and they poured new concrete, and it doesn't say anything preferential to any race anymore. The main point that I wanted to point out in this video is we celebrate the wrong people sometimes. Just because somebody is popular doesn't mean they're worth celebrating. Some people are just in pop culture. Think in the news media, all the dirtbags that are out there. Look, you want to talk about 2 different people? People are taking 2 different sides on the Ukraine-Russia thing. Zelensky, Vladimir Putin. When each one of those guys dies, somebody on both sides are going to act like they're absolute heroes. And I don't think both of them are heroes. I have my personal feelings about both of them, but I don't think they're heroes. But people are going to say really good things about them. Same with George Floyd. Just because people felt they had a cause, and let's face it, just like kids sometimes want to act up, people had an excuse to burn stuff. They burnt cities down, they looked around and they were like, nobody's arresting us. Let's go burn some more. So they perpetuated what happened and made it way worse than what it could have been because they didn't want to put this out because they were letting these people do this in the name of racism. Now, again, I know a lot of what I said today has pissed people off, both sides likely. Trying to be fair. I will say this too. Remember, and I don't know how much confidence you have in our judicial system, but a jury of 12 convicted Chauvin. They saw all the evidence that I just laid out and way more than that. They had way more than what I was able to summarize in this short video. And they determined that Chauvin was guilty. Now, on the flip side of that, could he have really gotten a fair trial? I mean, seriously. Could Chauvin have ever gotten a fair trial? I don't know. I don't care where you would have tried him in the United States. You could have tried him outside the United States. Do you think you could have found 12 members of a jury who didn't, one, already know about the trial, about the George Floyd dying, or that they hadn't already formed an opinion? Kind of hard for somebody to get a fair trial whenever people are going into that jury pool with a bias already, correct? So I think that this is important that we look at the fact that no matter what we think, he was found guilty. And take it for what you want. Again, was that fair? I don't know. Now, the final thing that I want to point out, and this is the most critical thing. Remember, all this took place in May of 2020, right? What was 2020? COVID year. That was the year that a lot of us got blackballed because we said negative things about COVID and about the experimental vaccine. A lot of us did. In fact, this video is probably going to get demonetized because I just said that, right? So this is only a few months after COVID had nailed the United States. So at that point, remember, everybody was going crazy. You could get in trouble for not wearing a mask anywhere else in a grocery store standing 6 feet behind somebody if you stepped up 5 feet behind them. But you could go out and burn a city block down with no mask on and everything was cool. All sins were forgiven as far as the COVID gods went. Speaking of COVID, looking more at his autopsy report, did you know that George Floyd actually had COVID? Now remember, this was at the height of COVID. He had COVID. So answer me this. Is COVID that deadly? I mean, the left still thinks COVID killed millions of people. Maybe it killed George Floyd. Remember, people would die in a motorcycle accident who had COVID, and they would list them as dying from COVID? Maybe George Floyd didn't die of fentanyl or Derek Chauvin on his neck. Maybe he died of COVID.